They thought they'd crushed me when they fired me mid-presentation, right in front of our biggest client and the entire team. The humiliation was supposed to be my final act at Vanguard Strategies. But as I stood there, watching my manager's smug face, I knew something he didn't. In exactly 3 minutes, I would reveal who really held the power in this room. They'd orchestrated my downfall perfectly. Except for one crucial detail, I'd been playing a different game entirely. My name is Harper Lewis, and at 35, I'd built my career one impossible client at a time. As Senior Account Director at Vanguard Strategies, Chicago's premier consulting firm, I was known for one thing: keeping the clients nobody else could handle. The difficult ones. The demanding ones. The ones who called at midnight with crisis after crisis. I'd started at Vanguard 7 years ago, fresh from my MBA, with nothing but ambition and a middle-class background that meant I had to work twice as hard as my Ivy League colleagues. No trust fund, no connections, just pure determination and an ability to read people that had served me well in this cutthroat environment. The conference room on the 42nd floor had become my second home. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Chicago skyline, where steel and glass monuments to corporate ambition pierced the morning fog. This morning, like countless others, I was preparing for what should have been another routine strategy session with Rexford Holdings. Rexford wasn't just any client, they were the client. A $5 million annual contract that represented nearly 20% of Vanguard's revenue. I'd personally salvaged that relationship 2 years ago when they were on the verge of walking away. And I'd been their primary contact ever since. Every quarterly review, every strategy pivot, every crisis management scenario went through me. My direct supervisor, Brian Turner, VP of Sales, watched from his corner office as I arranged my presentation materials. We'd never been friendly. Professional tolerance was the best way to describe our relationship. Brian was everything I wasn't, born into privilege, Harvard Business School, and possessed of that particular brand of confidence that came from never having to prove yourself. The tension between us had grown over the past year. Every success I achieved seemed to diminish him somehow. When I landed the Morrison Industries account, he'd found reasons to criticize my methods. When Rexford renewed their contract specifically requesting me as lead strategist, he'd suggested it was time to spread the opportunities around. I'd learned to navigate office politics the hard way. Document everything, trust carefully, always have a backup plan. In a place like Vanguard, where million-dollar deals were made and broken over lunch, survival meant understanding that your closest colleague could become your biggest threat overnight. As my team filed in for the meeting, 5 junior consultants who'd worked endless hours on this quarterly presentation, I noticed Brian following them. Unusual. He typically avoided these working sessions, preferring to swoop in only for the victory laps. "Morning, Harper," he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Big day today." Something in his tone made my instincts flare, but I pushed the feeling aside. The Rexford team would be dialing in soon, and I had a comprehensive strategic overhaul to present. Whatever game Brian was playing would have to wait. I had no idea that in less than an hour, my entire world would shatter and rebuild in ways I never imagined. The video conference screen flickered to life at precisely 10:09 a.m. Kara Mitchell, CEO of Rexford Holdings, appeared first, followed by 3 other executives from their Chicago headquarters. I'd worked with Kara for 2 years now, and we'd developed the kind of professional rhythm that made complex negotiations feel effortless. "Good morning, everyone," I began, clicking to the first slide of our presentation. "Today, we're proposing a complete realignment of Rexford's market penetration strategy for Q3 and Q4. 20 minutes in, I was in my element. The data was solid, the projections conservative but promising, and I could see Kara nodding approvingly as I walked through our recommendations. My team had done exceptional work. Sarah had found market opportunities everyone else had missed. James had built financial models that were works of art. And together, we'd crafted something I was genuinely proud of. That's when Brian stood up. "Harper," he interrupted, his voice cutting through my explanation of our timeline. "I think this is a good moment to pause. The room went quiet. Even through the video screen, I could see the confusion on the Rexford team's faces. You didn't interrupt client presentations. It was Business 101. Brian. I kept my voice steady, professional, though my pulse had started racing. He walked to the front of the room, positioning himself between me and the screen. I want to thank you for your contributions to this account. Harper, you've done adequate work over the years. Adequate. The word hung in the air like a slap. However, he continued, turning to face the screen while effectively blocking me out. I need to inform everyone that today marks Harper's final day with Vanguard Strategies. The leadership team has approved a restructuring of our account management system, and Harper's position has been eliminated. The silence that followed was deafening. I felt the blood drain from my face, my hands gripping the presentation remote so tightly the plastic creaked. Sarah gasped audibly. James's mouth fell open. On screen, Kara Mitchell's expression had gone from confused to something I'd never seen before. Cold fury. Excuse me? Kara's voice could have frozen Lake Michigan. You're terminating your lead strategist in the middle of our quarterly review? Brian's smile was all teeth and no warmth. I understand this timing isn't ideal, but I assure you, Rexford remains our top priority. I'll be personally taking over the account, along with my hand-picked team. We'll ensure a smooth transition. My mind raced while my body remained frozen. 2 years of 16-hour days. 2 years of saving their account. Building relationships, creating strategies that had increased their market share by 30%. And he was firing me in front of them, in front of my team, in the middle of my presentation. Brian! Kara's voice cut through my spiral. This is highly unprofessional. Harper has been instrumental in our success. I'd like an explanation. The decision has been made at the highest levels. Brian replied smoothly. Vanguard is moving in a new direction. I'm sure Harper will land on her feet somewhere else. Now, shall we continue with the presentation? I'm familiar with the strategy. No. Kara interrupted. We shall not. Richard, Marcus, Lisa. I think we need to discuss this internally. We'll reconnect when you've sorted out your internal affairs. The screen went black. The conference room erupted. My team was talking all at once. Voices raised in outrage and confusion. But I heard none of it. I stood there, staring at the blank screen, feeling the weight of public humiliation settling over me like a burial shroud. Harper. Brian's voice was patronizing now, victorious. Security will escort you out. You have 15 minutes to clear your desk. Your accounts have already been frozen, and your company devices need to be surrendered immediately. He'd planned this, every detail. The timing wasn't coincidental. He'd chosen the most devastating moment possible, ensuring maximum humiliation. In front of the client I'd bled for, in front of the team I'd mentored, in front of everyone who mattered. Why? The word came out steadier than I felt. His smile widened. Restructuring, like I said. Though if we're being honest, your style never quite fit with Vanguard's vision. Too aggressive. Too independent. Consider this a favor. Now you can find somewhere more suited to your approach. As security appeared at the door, I gathered my materials with hands that barely trembled. Inside, I was screaming. Outside, I maintained the same composure that had carried me through 7 years of corporate warfare. But Brian had made one crucial mistake. He'd assumed I was just another disposable employee. He had no idea what was coming. Security flanked me as I packed my desk, their presence a final humiliation in Brian's orchestrated takedown. But as I placed my awards and photos into a cardboard box, my mind wasn't on the present. It was racing through the past year, connecting dots that now formed a crystal-clear picture. It had started with small things. The Hartfield Industries pitch I'd spent 3 months developing, only to have Brian assign it to his golf buddy at the last minute. The promotion to VP that mysteriously vanished after I'd refused to support Brian's plan to overcharge a nonprofit client. The whispered conversations that stopped when I entered rooms. The gradual isolation from key meetings. I'd seen the pattern emerging 12 months ago. In corporate America, when they want you gone, They don't always fire you outright. They create conditions so intolerable you'll leave voluntarily. But I'd refused to play that game. Instead, I'd started playing my own. The first breakthrough had come 6 months ago, during a crisis at Rexford. Their competitor had poached 3 key executives and stolen proprietary data. While Brian panic-called lawyers and PR firms, I'd flown to Chicago on my own dime, spent 48 sleepless hours with Kara Mitchell, and helped architect a counter-strategy that not only stopped the bleeding, but positioned Rexford to acquire their competitor's best division. "You saved us," Kara had said over bourbon at 3 a.m. after we'd finalized the plan. Brian sent emails. "You showed up." That night, she'd asked me something that changed everything. "Have you ever thought about leaving Vanguard?" I'd been careful, professional. "I'm committed to my role." "That's not what I asked," she'd replied. "Rexford is spinning off a new strategic consulting division. We need someone who understands both sides of the table, someone who's been in the trenches." The offer had been unofficial then, exploratory. But as Brian's campaign against me intensified, my conversations with Kara had grown more serious. Conference calls after hours, strategy sessions disguised as client meetings, a vision for something different, a consulting firm that valued results over politics, merit over connections. 3 months ago, I'd made my decision. But I'd told no one, not even my closest allies at Vanguard. In this environment, trust was a luxury I couldn't afford. Instead, I'd documented everything, every undermined project, every stolen idea, every time Brian had taken credit for my work while setting me up to fail. The security guards shifted impatiently as I sealed the box. They didn't know about the encrypted files I'd legally backed up, my work product, created on my own time. They didn't know about the non-compete clause I'd had reviewed by 3 different lawyers, finding the loopholes Vanguard's arrogant legal team had left. Most importantly, they didn't know about the contract I'd signed with Rexford Holdings last week, carefully structured to begin the moment my employment with Vanguard ended. "Ms. Lewis," one guard prompted, "we need to go." I looked around the office one last time. 7 years of my life in this building. 7 years of believing that hard work and talent would be enough. The naive idealism of that younger Harper almost made me smile. My phone, my personal phone, the one Brian couldn't touch, buzzed with a text from Kara. "Legal approved, announcement ready, your move." As we walked to the elevator, employees peered from cubicles and doorways. Word had already spread. Harper Lewis, the woman who never missed a deadline, never lost a client, never backed down from a fight, had been terminated in the middle of a presentation. Some looked sympathetic, others, Brian's circle, barely concealed their satisfaction. But I wasn't thinking about them. I was thinking about the employment agreement in my car, the press release Rexford's PR team had prepared, and the look on Brian's face when he realized what he'd done. He thought he'd orchestrated my professional death. Instead, he'd triggered my resurrection. The elevator doors closed on Vanguard Strategies. When they opened again in the lobby, I wasn't just Harper Lewis, disgraced former employee. I was Harper Lewis, incoming CEO of Rexford Strategy Ventures, with a $50 million operating budget and a very specific vision for the future. Brian had taught me the rules of corporate warfare. He just hadn't expected me to rewrite them. The guards escorted me to the building entrance, their duty complete. As I stepped onto Michigan Avenue, my phone rang. Kara's name lit up the screen. "Harper," she said without preamble. "Ready to make the announcement?" I looked back at Vanguard's gleaming tower one last time. Somewhere up there, Brian was probably celebrating his victory, planning how to milk the Rexford account for every dollar. "I'm ready," I said. "Let's do this." 20 minutes after being escorted from the building, I was back in the Vanguard lobby. This time, I wasn't alone. Kara Mitchell stood beside me, along with Rexford's chief legal officer and their head of PR. We'd coordinated this like a military operation. "Visitor passes for the Rexford team," I told the reception desk, my voice steady and professional. The security guard who just escorted me out did a double take. "Ms. Lewis, but you were just..." I'm here as a representative of Rexford Holdings, I clarified. We have an urgent matter to discuss with Mr. Turner. The confusion in the lobby was palpable as we rode the elevator back to the 42nd floor. The same employees who'd watched my humiliation barely 30 minutes ago now saw me returning with one of their most important clients. The whispers started before the elevator doors even closed. Brian's assistant nearly dropped her coffee when she saw us. Ms. Lewis, Mr. Turner is in the conference room with the team. Perfect, Kara said coolly. We'll see ourselves in. The conference room doors opened to reveal chaos. Brian was at the whiteboard, clearly struggling with my presentation while my former team sat in uncomfortable silence. Sarah saw me first, her eyes widening. Then Brian turned. The color drained from his face. Harper, you can't be here. Security. She's with us, Kara interrupted, taking a seat at the head of the table. And we have business to discuss. Brian's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Kara, I apologize for the earlier disruption. As I was explaining, the transition. There won't be a transition. Kara cut him off. Effective immediately. Rexford Holdings is terminating our contract with Vanguard Strategies. The silence was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop in downtown Chicago traffic. What? Brian's voice cracked. You can't. We have agreements, penalties, which your legal team should have reviewed more carefully. Rexford's chief legal officer interjected. The termination clause is quite clear. In the event of material changes to the account team without client consent, we have the right to exit without penalty. But Brian was scrambling now, his carefully constructed arrogance crumbling. This is because of Harper? She's one employee. An employee you just fired in the middle of our quarterly review. Kara's voice could have cut glass. Without consultation, without warning, without professionalism. I stood, taking my time, letting the moment build. Every eye in the room was on me. Actually, Brian, I said, allowing myself the smallest smile. I should thank you. Your timing was perfect. You see, I've accepted a position as CEO of Rexford Strategy Ventures, a new subsidiary focused on everything I've been doing here, but better. The revelation hit the room like a shockwave. James actually applauded before catching himself. Sarah's face split into a grin she didn't even try to hide. That's, Brian spluttered, the non-compete. Doesn't apply to employment with a client, I finished. Section 3, subsection C. I'm sure you remember approving that exception yourself. You said it would never be relevant because no client would ever hire just a strategist. His face cycled through emotions, disbelief, rage, and finally, the dawning realization of what he'd done. He'd just lost the company's biggest client, 20% of revenue, in front of witnesses. The board will hear about this, he threatened, but his voice lacked conviction. I'm sure they will. I agreed. I imagine they'll be very interested in why you chose to terminate the account manager of your largest client without following proper protocols. Or why you did it as a public spectacle. Or why you've been systematically undermining the highest performing members of your team. Kara stood, gathering her papers. Rexford will be moving all ongoing projects to Harper's team at RSV. Any Vanguard employees interested in real opportunities should feel free to reach out. She looked directly at Sarah and James as she said it. The message was clear. As we walked toward the door, I turned back one last time. Brian stood there, surrounded by the ruins of his power play, finally understanding that he'd been outmaneuvered by the person he'd dismissed as too aggressive. Oh, Brian, I added, my hand on the door handle. That restructuring you mentioned, you might want to prepare for it. I have a feeling the board will have some thoughts about executives who cost them 8 figures in annual revenue. The door closed on his stunned face, but not before I saw the fear creeping in. He'd played with fire, and I'd brought the inferno. As we waited for the elevator, Kara turned to me with something approaching admiration. Remind me never to get on your bad side. I don't have a bad side, I replied, watching the numbers count down. I just have a side that believes in consequences. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Within 2 hours of our exit, Vanguard's stock price dropped 3% on rumors of losing Rexford. By market close, it was down 7%. Financial Twitter was having a field day. My phone hadn't stopped buzzing. Former colleagues, industry contacts, reporters. Everyone wanted to know what had really happened in that conference room. But I ignored them all, focusing instead on the stream of emails from Vanguard employees suddenly interested in exploring new opportunities. Brian, predictably, went into damage control mode. An internal memo leaked within hours, painting me as a disgruntled former employee who had conspired with a client to damage Vanguard's reputation. It was so desperately transparent that it only made things worse. Sarah forwarded me the email chain that followed. The CEO demanding answers. The CFO calculating lost revenue. The board scheduling an emergency meeting, and Brian, frantically trying to shift blame to everyone but himself. He's claiming you seduced Kara Mitchell to steal the account. Sarah told me over drinks that evening. She'd submitted her resignation that afternoon. He actually used the word seduced in an email to the board. I nearly choked on my martini. Please tell me you have screenshots. Already forwarded to my personal email, she grinned. Along with about 200 other emails where he takes credit for your work or undermines female employees, just in case anyone needs them for, say, a hostile work environment lawsuit. The next 3 days were a blur of activity. Rexford's PR team had crafted the announcement perfectly. Rexford Holdings launches strategic consulting division, names Harper Lewis as CEO. The press release emphasized innovation, fresh perspectives, and client-focused solutions, a subtle but clear contrast to Vanguard's old-school approach. Meanwhile, Vanguard was hemorrhaging talent. James joined my team on day 2. By day 3, 4 more senior consultants had reached out. Each one had a similar story. Passed over for promotions, ideas stolen, contributions minimized. Brian hadn't just targeted me, he'd created a culture of fear and favoritism that had been driving out top performers for years. The emergency board meeting happened on a Thursday. I heard about it from Marcus Chen, a board member who'd always been fair to me. He called personally. "Harper," he said without preamble. "The board just voted. Brian's out. Effective immediately." I sat down slowly, the weight of it hitting me. Out? Terminated for cause. The Rexford debacle was the final straw, but once we started investigating, we found a pattern. Discriminatory behavior, financial irregularities, false reporting. He'd been padding his numbers with your achievements for years. I closed my eyes, feeling a mixture of vindication and exhaustion. What happens now? Vanguard needs to rebuild. We've lost Rexford, but we're hoping to minimize other departures. The new leadership wants to extend an olive branch, perhaps a consulting arrangement with RSV. The irony was delicious. They wanted to hire me as a consultant to fix the mess Brian had created. "I'll consider it," I said carefully. "But my first priority is building something better at RSV." After we hung up, I sat in my new office, still smelling of fresh paint and possibility, and thought about karma. Brian had wielded his power like a weapon, never considering that weapons could be turned against their wielder. His final email to the company was forwarded to me within minutes of being sent, full of vague accusations, bitter recriminations, and threats of legal action. It was the desperate flailing of a man who'd built his career on stepping on others, only to discover that, eventually, you run out of people to climb over. But the sweetest moment came later that evening. A LinkedIn notification. Brian Turner has updated his status to seeking new opportunities. The comment section was brutal. Former employees sharing their experiences, clients questioning his integrity. Industry insiders discussing the Vanguard meltdown. His reputation, so carefully cultivated through stolen achievements and strategic betrayals, had crumbled in less than a week. I didn't comment. I didn't need to. My success would be response enough. As I prepared to leave the office that night, Kara called. "Have you seen the numbers?" "Which numbers?" 3 more major firms have reached out about partnerships with RSV. They all mentioned wanting to work with ethical leadership. She paused. You've started something here. Harper? Looking out at the Chicago skyline, I thought about the conference room where I'd been humiliated just days ago. Brian had thought he was ending my career. Instead, he'd freed me to build something better. No, I corrected. Brian started this. I just finished it. The annual Strategic Leadership Summit at McCormick Place was the industry's most prestigious event. Fortune 500 CEOs, consulting legends, and rising stars gathered to discuss the future of business strategy. This year, I was the keynote speaker. Standing backstage, adjusting my microphone. I almost didn't notice the familiar figure hunched in the back row until the stage lights hit him. Brian Turner, in an ill-fitting suit that had seen better days, trying to blend into the shadows. He'd registered as a professional in transition, the conference's charitable program for unemployed executives. Our eyes met across the auditorium. For a moment, time stopped. The man who'd once held my career in his hands now sat in the cheap seats at a conference where I was the featured speaker. He looked away first. Ladies and gentlemen, the announcer's voice boomed. Please welcome the CEO of Rexford Strategy Ventures and our keynote speaker, Harper Lewis. The applause was thunderous. 3,000 industry professionals rising to their feet. As I walked to the podium, I passed directly by Brian's row. He kept his eyes fixed on his lap. 2 years ago, I began, letting my voice fill the massive hall. I was fired in the middle of a client presentation, publicly humiliated, professionally assassinated. It was the best thing that ever happened to me. The audience leaned in, hungry for the story. I gave it to them, not with bitterness, but with the clarity that comes from distance and success. We all face moments when someone else tries to write our ending, I continued, making eye contact with faces throughout the crowd, but carefully avoiding that back row. A boss who undermines us, a system that undervalues us, a culture that tells us to accept humiliation as the price of ambition. I talked about building RSV, about creating cultures of trust, about the false power of fear-based leadership. I shared numbers, our 94% employee retention rate, our client satisfaction scores, our revolutionary profit-sharing model that had made millionaires of early employees. But here's what I learned, I said, building to my conclusion. The opposite of toxic leadership isn't revenge, it's excellence. It's building something so undeniably better that the old ways become obsolete. It's proving that success doesn't require stepping on others. The presentation screens behind me showed RSV's growth trajectory, client testimonials, employee satisfaction surveys. Hard data that proved treating people well wasn't just ethical, it was profitable. No one else can write your ending, I finished, my voice carrying to every corner of the auditorium. Sometimes a door slams in your face not to stop you, but to show you were always meant to build your own building. Sometimes, the person who tries to bury you is actually handing you the seeds to grow something extraordinary. The standing ovation lasted 3 full minutes. As I made my way off stage, shaking hands and accepting congratulations, I noticed Brian's seat was empty. He'd slipped out during the applause. Later, at the reception, Kara found me. That was brilliant, she said, champagne glass raised. Though I noticed you didn't mention Brian by name. Why would I replied. This was never about him. He was just the catalyst. The story isn't about the person who knocked me down. It's about what I chose to build when I got back up. As the evening wound down, my phone buzzed with a LinkedIn notification. Brian Turner had viewed my profile. No message, no connection request. Just a digital footprint that said he'd been watching. I deleted the notification without a second thought. He was the past. RSV was the future. And that future was bright enough to make shadows irrelevant. Walking out into the Chicago night, I thought about that conference room where everything had changed. Brian had given me an unwanted gift that day. The push I needed to stop building someone else's dream and start building my own. In trying to destroy me, he'd created his own replacement. In trying to humiliate me, he'd handed me a platform. In trying to end my story, he'd given me the perfect beginning. Sometimes, the best revenge really is massive success. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'm curious. Where are you listening from? Drop a comment below and let me know what city or country you're tuning in from. I love connecting with listeners around the world. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your own thoughts about dealing with workplace challenges. Have you ever turned a setback into success? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments.